Well, Arthur Bisguier, as you saw in the introductory screen, had 10 points in this tournament. 2 draws, 1 loss, 9 wins. And that was the real argument. Bobby had no losses, but he had 4 draws, only 7 wins. So one perspective says, well, when you have 2 players with the same number of total points, the guy with the most total wins should prevail. The other perspective is no, it's the guy with the fewest losses that should prevail. What do you guys think? To me, it's easier not to lose than it is to win. It's easier to draw and not lose than it is to win. So I'm kind of on the side that says the guy with the most wins. Even though it means that he had more losses, he also had more wins, which means he played more aggressively. He put more out there on the line. So it was really important to someone to have a kid champion, it seems like to me. Bisguier was on his way home with the trophy in his trunk, ladles and jolly spoons. Now, if you're not familiar with Arthur Bisguier, let me tell you a little more about him. He was born in New York. He became an international master in 1950. He got the GM title the year this event was played, 1957. He was the United States chess champion in 1954. He won the U.S. Open in 1950, 1956, the year before this event. And also he won the U.S. Open in 1959. He was the Manhattan Chess Club champion in 1948, 1949, 1957-58, 1958-59, 1967-68, and 1968-69. Some of his tournament successes included a first-place finish, tied for first with Savieli Tartakova at Southsea in 1950, a first-place finish at Vienna 1952-53, a first-place Rosenwald victory 1955 and 56. He tied for second at San Juan in 1969, and he took first place at Lone Pine in 1973. Also, quite impressively, toward the end of his life, Arthur Bisguier became the world's oldest active grandmaster, his last tournament being the MCC Memorial Swiss in Natick, Massachusetts, September 2014, at the age of 84. Bisguier starting this game with e4. Bobby, of course, with c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, pawn d6, pawn d4, pawns are traded, and we have an open Sicilian. Knight f6, knight c3, a6, the Miguel Najdorf's variation. Opacensky's variation is bishop e2, pawn e5. We've seen this so many times already from Fischer that we could play it ourselves, couldn't we? Knight to b3, bishop to e7, castles, bishop g5. Now here, the most common move is bishop e6, but it's only a few games more common than Queen's Knight d7, which is what Bobby played. But quickly, let me just put this up. And here you can either capture the knight or push the pawn. I, as white, like to push the f-man here, as you know. And on e takes, then the bishop comes back. Both sides have some weaknesses to deal with. Play knight c6 here. Get the king off of this open diagonal. I've taught you that many times before. Rook c8 onto the open file, and queen e1 onto this open diagonal. This is all stuff you've seen from yours truly live as I get decimated by my opponents playing these lines. Well, eventually he'll probably push it on up here. There are a couple of ways you can go about it. You can transfer your knight and look for a trade to reconnect the pawns. A couple of things you can do. You can push. Not sure if any of this is in the book because, once again, I didn't get to, King H1 being the last book move, the traditional line. Anyway, Queen's Knight to D7 gets an inaccuracy, but it is the second most commonly played move. After Knight BD7, Pawn A4, Pawn H6 hits the bishop, Bishop H4, Pawn B6, Bishop C4, Bishop B7, Queen E2, Queen C7, King's Rook to D1, King's Rook C8 right here, Knight D2, G5 hits the bishop, Bishop to G3, Knight F8, Pawn H4. Yeah, the bot preferring Bishop A2. You could also play Bishop D3 if you want to keep looking over here, although you do have to deal with a tall pawn for quite some time, don't you? But I get a star for the move. H4, though, not getting a star. And Knight G6 also doesn't get a star. Knight E6 being called for to remain equal. Pawn takes the pawn, pawn takes the pawn, bishop B3. Now King G7 gets out of the bishop's line of fire. Knight C4, not at all liked by the bot. Knight F4 says you should have moved your queen. Bishop takes the knight. And which pawn do we capture with class? Do you remember what I said in the earlier analysis? Capture toward the center. Now, in this position, you probably find capturing away from the center if you're worried about exposing your king. But really, toward the center is the best move, in my opinion, and that's what Bobby played, and it gets a star. But I can see why you might be worried. Hey, my king's standing here in the emperor's new clothes. Well, you could just transfer both rooks and then tuck your king away back here at the end of that transfer. Your knight is covering these squares and your pawn is covering there. Your opponent has no real chance to attack. Your bishop is covering here and here. So the region in the vicinity of your king's exposure is inaccessible to white, is what I'm getting at here. White here played A5, pawn takes the pawn, knight takes the pawn, now rook to H8. Who saw that coming? Knight takes the bishop, and queen takes the knight. Now knight D5. Should probably try Queen C4 here. That's awfully ominous. He went with Knight D5. Yeah, Queen C4 being called for. On Queen C4, man, this is awfully ominous. You can discover a defense, actually. Just play Bishop F8. Or defend directly with the rook. Of course. Probably white here could play something like... Now you're probably okay to play Knight D5 or... bring up a rook and add some support here. It says rook A5 is a mistake. I did call knight D5 first, but I don't know why rook A5 is a mistake there. Why is rook A5 a mistake? Okay, it might not be your first choice, but I hardly think it's a mistake. Knight D5 right away, though, gets the big orange question mark. Bobby with rook H6. I have no idea why that is marked inaccurate. That's a perfectly solid move. He's preparing to double his rooks on the H-file. Rook D3 from Bisguier, and we do get the doubling of the rooks. And of course that threatens checkmate on the next turn, so rook H3 prevents such an attack and threatens to trade rooks on H6. Bobby says, no, since a rook trade is inevitable, I will initiate the trade and bust up your pawns. Interesting. I was wondering about taking the knight here. Is there any reason I cannot take the knight? I mean, is this not just a matter of preference? I guess if you're worried about any kind of infiltration. Yeah, I was looking at knight takes knight, rook takes rook. I get a thumbs up. You probably do not prefer to take this. Guess you could get away with taking the bishop, the knight with the bishop, although I can play queen takes pawn. Let's look at this line real quick. Queen takes pawn, hits the rook. Yeah, right, and then when you defend your rook, then I can trade rooks. Say queen d1, for example, and then boom. Okay, so that line is playable. On rook takes rook here. On rook takes rook. Hold on, what about pawn takes knight before we look at rook takes rook? On pawn takes knight, that gets a question mark. Yeah, you don't want to block your bishop for one thing. Yeah, but that just doesn't work because I will go ahead and trade that. But I will not take this pawn because then I get forked, don't I? Don't take the free pawn, guys. Then you'll get forked. Quit taking those free pawns. Now, what was the other line we were wanting to talk about? Rook takes rook. We wanted to talk about rook takes rook here. Yeah, I just take with my rook, and then you probably take my knight anyway. Right? It's the same thing. It's just different. It's exactly the same thing. It's just different. All right, I think we've looked at all of those lines. Rook takes rook by Bobby Fischer on move 27. Pawn takes the rookie and eats it like a cookie. Now queen to d7 seems pretty reasonable. Super attacking the H-man. Why, Ficklebot? Why does that get a question mark? How could this be a bad move? I refuse. How is this a bad move? Explain this to me, ladles and jelly spoons. That is a super attack. It can't be that bad of a move. The eval bar's dead center, and it doesn't even butt. Okay, it says it's slightly better for... Oh, it can't make up its mind. All right, well, I like this move, even if Ficklebot didn't. Knight takes knight. Now king takes the knight. And again, probably doesn't matter whether you take with the king or the bishop, but it's probably a good idea to get off the open G file. Korotki Gennady agreeing with Coach Daniel. Thank you. It's always good to have support from people in the know. You know, we have a real equal position here, don't we? Queen G4. Queen takes the queen. Pawn takes the queen. This should peter out to a draw. You have opposite colored bishops. Yeah. I mean, bishop a4 was played right here. If you're wondering, can't I take this pawn here? I gotta remember to play f3. And then rook g8, you're gonna win this pawn. Okay, bishop a4 was played. King e6. Bishop b3 check. King goes back. They agreed to a draw. Let's look at the numbers. Both players in the 94s, white 94.5 accuracy, black 94.7 accuracy. Both players 2,800 single game assessment rating. Pretty competitive game. Black had a real good opening. Bisguier was certainly on another level in this game. Both players with an incredible middle game. Bobby even better end game than his middle game, it seemed.